The massive crystal ship moved through space like a floating mountain of diamond. Its surface caught starlight and threw it back in rainbow patterns that could blind smaller creatures from 1,000 miles away. Inside the ship, Commander Zixthaler stood 12 feet tall on 6 powerful legs. His shell was harder than steel and shined like polished stone. When he breathed, the sound was like wind through caves. "Another primitive world," he said to his crew. His voice came not from his mouth but directly into their minds. All Kethmori could speak this way. It was one of many gifts that made them the rulers of the galaxy. "Show me these humans." The viewing screen filled with images of Earth, blue oceans, white clouds, green lands, cities made of metal and glass, small creatures with soft skin walking on 2 legs. Zixthalar made a sound like rocks grinding together. This was how Kethmori laughed. "They cannot even grow proper shells," he said. "Look how weak they are. Their minds must be like water, easy to shape and control." His second-in-command, Velthara, stepped forward. Her crystal shell was decorated with marks showing her many victories. She had conquered 47 worlds for the Kethmori Empire. Each time had been easy. Each species had fallen to their superior minds within days. "Shall I prepare the Mindbreaker ships?" she asked. "A dozen should be enough. These humans appear even weaker than the Trelawney we conquered last season." Zixthalar studied the images more carefully. He saw the humans' crude vehicles that used fire and metal to move. He saw their weapons that threw bits of metal through the air. He saw their homes built from dead trees and shaped stone. Everything about them seemed backwards and simple. 6 ships will be enough, he decided. Do not waste resources on such prey. Bring their leaders under mental control first. The rest will follow as they always do. The Kethmori had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years. In that time, they had brought 800 species under their control. Some had tried to fight with weapons. Some had tried to hide in deep space. Some had even tried to bargain or make deals. All had failed in the end. The secret was the Kethmori mind power. They could reach into another being's thoughts and take control like a puppet master pulling strings. Most creatures could not resist even for a few seconds. Their minds would break like thin ice under pressure. After that, they became willing slaves who thanked their masters for the gift of purpose. "I want the humans processed quickly," Zixthalar continued. "The Emperor expects this sector cleared within the lunar cycle. We have already spent too much time on this small arm of the galaxy." Velthara touched her forehead with one claw, the Kethmori sign of respect. "It will be done, Commander." "Should we scan for valuable resources while we subdue them?" "Of course. Their water world might serve as a breeding ground for the Sithkar livestock, and their star burns clean. Good energy for the mining stations." He turned away from the screen, already losing interest. "File the standard reports. Mark this world for basic harvest protocols. Nothing special about these humans." The crystal ships moved toward Earth like a gathering storm. Each vessel was the size of a small city, filled with thousands of Kethmori warriors and their enslaved soldiers from other conquered worlds. Their hulls were grown rather than built, shaped by Kethmori mind power from living crystal that could heal itself and adapt to any weapon. Inside the ships, the warriors prepared their minds for battle. But it was not a battle as other species understood it. The Kethmori did not plan to fight with weapons or ships. They would reach across space with their thoughts and simply take control of human minds. Within hours, every human leader would be their puppet. Within days, the entire species would work for the glory of the Empire. Captain Silthanas checked his mental focusing device. The small crystal attached to his forehead would boost his natural mind powers 10 times over. With it, he could control up to 50 lesser beings at once. The device had been grown especially for this mission, fed on the psychic energy of a dozen different conquered species. "Have you studied the human mind patterns?" asked his junior officer, a young Kethmori named Kixilar who had only conquered 2 worlds. "Briefly," Silthanas replied. "Their thoughts are chaotic and unorganized. Like most primitives, they think in simple patterns: fear, hunger, reproduction, easy to override with proper commands." Kixilar looked at the data again. "Commander, some of these readings seem unusual. Their brain activity shows strange peaks in areas we do not recognize." "All species are different," Silthanas said with the confidence of experience. The Vrex had silicon-based neural networks. The Nethyi processed thoughts through liquid crystal matrices. The Skrit used distributed hive mind processing. All fell to Kethmori mental superiority in the end. The ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Earth's solar system. Immediately, their sensors began picking up human communications. Radio waves filled with primitive entertainment and information. The Kethmori listeners translated the signals with ease. "They do not even know we are here," Velthara reported to Zixthaler. "Their detection systems are laughably weak. We could destroy their entire civilization before they noticed our presence." "Destruction is wasteful," the commander replied. "Living slaves serve better than dead ones. Begin the mental probes. Target their leadership centers first. Once we control their governments, the rest will surrender peacefully." The first probe ships, each no larger than a human aircraft, slipped through Earth's atmosphere like falling stars. They carried no weapons, no bombs, no soldiers. They carried something far more dangerous. Kethmori minds focused into narrow beams of pure control. Captain Silthanis selected his first target carefully, a large human settlement called New Geneva, where their reading showed millions of the creatures living close together. The mental probe beam would hit their leadership first, then spread through the population like ripples in a pond. "Beginning first contact protocol," he announced to his crew. "Prepare to welcome another species into the Empire's loving embrace." The probe beam lanced down from orbit, invisible to human instruments but carrying the concentrated will of a dozen Kethmori warriors. It struck the government building in the center of New Geneva with the force of a mental avalanche, ready to shatter human minds like glass. For 3,000 years, this had never failed. For 3,000 years, every species had fallen to Kethmori mental dominance within the first strike. Captain Silthanis expected to be reporting success within minutes. But as the probe beam hit the human minds below, something unprecedented happened. Instead of shattering, some of the human thoughts seemed to bounce back. The feedback hit the Kethmori probe team like a physical blow, causing several warriors to cry out in pain and confusion. "What was that?" Kixilar gasped, his focusing crystal flickering with unstable energy. Captain Silthanis stared at his instruments in disbelief. The readings made no sense. Half the humans in the target area had fallen under control as expected, but the other half, their minds were still completely free. Some even seemed to be fighting back, their chaotic thought patterns creating interference in the mental control network. For the first time in his long career of conquest, a Kethmori warrior felt something he had never experienced before, a cold feeling that his species called uncertainty, and deep in his crystal heart something even stranger, the first tiny seed of fear. Captain Sarah Chen felt the moment when half her crew stopped being themselves. One second they were normal people working at their stations in the New Geneva Defense Center. The next second their eyes went blank and they stood up like robots waiting for orders. But Sarah's mind stayed her own. So did Lieutenant Torres at the communications desk, and Sergeant Murphy by the door, and about half the people in the room. They looked at each other with fear and confusion as their friends and coworkers stood silent and empty. "What's happening to them?" Torres whispered, not daring to speak too loud. Sarah had no answer. But she could see through the windows that the same thing was happening all over the city. People walking in straight lines toward the center of town. Cars stopping in the middle of streets as their drivers got out and joined the walking crowds. But other people were running, hiding, shouting warnings. The first alien ship appeared over the city like a floating mountain of crystal. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time, catching the sunlight and throwing rainbows across the sky. But Sarah knew beauty could be dangerous. "All free personnel, this is Captain Chen," she spoke into her radio. "We have some kind of alien mind control situation. If you can still think for yourself, stay hidden and observe. Do not approach the controlled humans." From around the city, scattered voices responded. A school teacher named Mrs. Rodriguez reported that half her students were walking toward downtown, while the other half were crying and confused. A mechanic called Joe said his whole garage crew except him were marching like soldiers. A doctor at the hospital said patients were getting out of their beds and walking away. Sarah realized something important. The mind control wasn't working on everyone. About half the population could resist it, but why? She didn't have time to figure it out before the controlled humans started acting strange. They began gathering materials, metal, electronics, chemicals from laboratories. They worked together with perfect cooperation, building things Sarah didn't recognize. "They're making weapons," Sergeant Murphy said, watching through binoculars. "But not weapons I've ever seen before." The controlled humans built tall towers that hummed with energy. They created flying vehicles that moved without any visible engines. They organized themselves into groups with military precision, even though most of them had never been soldiers. But the free humans weren't giving up. Marcus Webb had been a janitor at the power plant for 20 years. He knew every wire, every circuit, every backup system in the building. When the controlled workers tried to modify the plant's power output, Marcus was ready. He had built small electromagnetic pulse devices from spare parts and cleaning supplies. Nobody expected a janitor to know about electronics, but Marcus had always been good with his hands. He placed his homemade EMP bombs at key points around the power grid. "This is for trying to turn my friends into zombies," he muttered, and flipped the switch. The electromagnetic pulse knocked out power across 3 city blocks. The alien devices stopped working, and several controlled humans collapsed as the connection to their minds was broken. It was only for a few minutes before backup power restored the control. But it proved something important. The aliens could be fought. Across town, Mrs. Rodriguez was proving that teachers were tougher than they looked. She had turned her elementary school into a fortress, using desks and chairs to block doorways. The children who still had their own minds helped her set traps throughout the building. When controlled adults came to collect the children, they found themselves walking into walls of overturned furniture. They stepped on marbles that sent them sliding into carefully placed trash cans. They got tangled in jump ropes stretched across hallways at ankle height. "Children, remember what we learned about the Revolutionary War," Mrs. Rodriguez called out as they pelted the intruders with paper balls from their hiding places. "Sometimes you have to fight smarter, not harder." The controlled humans were strong and organized, but they moved predictably. They didn't expect resistance from kids and their teacher. Every time they tried to enter the school, they found new obstacles and surprises. Meanwhile, old farmer Jake Mullins was having thoughts that would have terrified the aliens if they could read his free mind. Jake had been crop dusting for 40 years, flying his small plane over fields to spray insecticide. He knew chemicals better than most scientists. Jake looked at his plane, looked at his supply of agricultural chemicals, and had a very dangerous idea. "If those crystal heads have better senses than us," he said to his dog, "then maybe that's their weakness too." He loaded his crop dusting plane with a mixture of ammonia, sulfur compounds, and other chemicals that created the worst smell possible. If the aliens could smell better than humans, this would be like a punch in the face to their senses. Jake flew his plane low over the alien ship, dumping his chemical mixture all over its crystal surface. The reaction was immediate and satisfying. The ship began to glow angry red instead of peaceful blue. Several smaller alien craft that had been moving smoothly around the city suddenly wobbled and crashed. "That's for messing with our planet," Jake whooped, flying his plane in victory circles around the city. But the aliens were learning too. Captain Silthanis stood in his ship's command center, his crystal shell now showing stress cracks from the mental feedback he had received. This had never happened before. The human resistance was impossible according to everything the Kethmori knew about lesser species. "Send in the ground troops," he ordered. "If we cannot control them all mentally, we will have to use physical force." The crystal ships opened like flowers, releasing thousands of controlled soldiers from other conquered worlds. Tall gray-skinned Vreks with their silicon-based strength. Aquatic Nethi in mechanical suits that let them fight on land. Insectoid Skrit workers carrying energy weapons. But even these alien soldiers found the free humans harder to fight than expected. The humans didn't follow normal battle plans. They used tricks, ambushes, and tactics that made no sense to ordered military minds. When alien soldiers expected humans to run, they attacked instead. When the aliens prepared for direct assault, the humans disappeared into sewers and buildings. Human fighters would sacrifice themselves to destroy important alien equipment, something that confused the controlled minds who valued their own existence above all else. Dr. Elena Vasquez watched the battle from her laboratory at the university. As a neuroscientist, she was fascinated by what was happening. The mental control worked on some humans, but not others. There had to be a scientific reason. She began studying brain scans of both controlled and free humans. Slowly, a pattern emerged. The free humans showed unusual activity in brain regions associated with creativity and chaos. Their thoughts moved in ways that seemed random and unpredictable. "It's like their minds are too messy for the aliens to grab onto," she said to herself, studying the data. The aliens need organized, predictable thought patterns to establish control. But some human brains are naturally chaotic. Elena realized this might be more than just a defense, it might be a weapon. If human mental chaos could disrupt alien control, maybe it could be amplified and used against the invaders. As night fell over New Geneva, the battle was far from over. The aliens had conquered half the city, but the other half fought on with determination that surprised everyone, including themselves. The free humans had learned something important that day. They might be weaker than the aliens. They might have simpler technology, but they had something the galaxy's rulers had never faced before: the sheer stubborn refusal to give up that made humans dangerous when cornered. In space above, Commander Zixthaler received reports that troubled his ancient mind. This conquest was supposed to take hours. It had been a full day, and his forces were still fighting street by street against creatures that should have surrendered immediately. For the first time in 3,000 years of conquest, the Kethmori Empire faced something they didn't understand: an enemy that got stronger when it should get weaker, and fought harder when it should give up. News traveled fast through the Kethmori Empire, even across the vast distances between stars. Within days, every crystal ship in the galaxy had heard the impossible reports from Earth. The humans were still fighting. After a full week, they were still fighting. On the mining world of Kepler 442b, Vrek slaves looked up from their work when they heard their Kethmori masters arguing in worried voices. The tall, gray-skinned Vreks had been slaves for 200 years, but they still remembered freedom. They whispered to each other in their silicon-based language that sounded like wind through crystal caves. "The mind breakers are failing," one Rex worker told another. "The humans resist the thought control." "Impossible," replied his friend. "No species can resist the Kethmori mind power. Then why do our masters look afraid?" It was true. For the first time in centuries, the Kethmori overseers seemed nervous. They kept checking their communication crystals for updates from Earth. They moved with quick, worried motions instead of their usual calm superiority. On Earth itself, the battle had grown into something no one expected. The free humans had learned to work together in ways that amazed even themselves. Captain Sarah Chen now commanded a network of resistance fighters that included everyone from school children to retired soldiers. "Marcus, how many power grids can you knock out today?" she asked the janitor who had become their chief sabotage expert. "Give me 6 good people and some basic supplies," Marcus replied. "And I can shut down half the city's alien devices by noon." Mrs. Rodriguez had turned her school into a training center where children taught adults how to think in chaotic patterns. The kids were naturally good at it. Their minds jumped from idea to idea too fast for alien control to follow. "Okay, class," she said to a group of grown-ups sitting in tiny chairs. "Today we're going to practice random thinking. I want you to imagine a purple elephant riding a bicycle while singing your favorite song and remembering what you had for breakfast. All at the same time." The adults looked confused, but they tried. Dr. Elena Vasquez monitored their brain patterns and smiled at the results. "Perfect," she said. "Your neural chaos is increasing. The aliens won't be able to grab onto thoughts that scattered and wild." But the biggest change came when the first alien ship fell into human hands. Admiral Jackson Pierce had been retired from the Navy for 5 years, growing tomatoes in his backyard and complaining about young people. When the aliens attacked, something old and dangerous woke up inside him. He gathered every military person he could find, active duty, retired, even some who had only watched war movies. They had been studying the crashed Kethmori ships for weeks, trying to understand how they worked. The crystal technology was beyond human science, but humans were good at one thing: taking apart machines and putting them back together differently. "The ship's brain is this central crystal," explained Dr. Vasquez, pointing to a football-sized gem that pulsed with soft light. "It responds to mental commands, but only from Kethmori minds." "What if we trick it?" asked Admiral Pierce. "Make it think we're Kethmori?" "Impossible. The mental patterns are completely different." But Marcus the janitor had a different idea. "What if we don't trick it? What if we just mess it up?" He showed them a device he had built from spare parts and alien crystals. It looked like a radio crossed with a disco ball, covered in wires and blinking lights. "I call it a chaos broadcaster," Marcus explained. "It takes human brain patterns and amplifies them. If I'm right, it should confuse the ship's crystal brain so much that it stops working properly." They tested it on a small alien fighter craft. The moment Marcus turned on his device, the ship's systems went crazy. Lights flashed in random colors. The engines started and stopped without reason. The ship spun in circles, completely out of control. "It works," Dr. Vasquez shouted. "The chaos is overloading their control systems." Within hours, human engineers were installing chaos broadcasters on every piece of alien technology they could capture. The Kethmori ships that had seemed invincible became unpredictable and dangerous to their own crews. Admiral Pierce stood on the bridge of humanity's first stolen starship, watching Earth shrink below them. The crystal ship still looked alien, but now it responded to human chaos instead of Kethmori order. Human crew members sat at stations designed for 12-foot-tall crystal beings, but they made it work through pure stubbornness. "Take us to the Kepler system," Pierce ordered. "Time to return some favors." The ship jumped to faster-than-light travel, carrying its human crew toward their first rescue mission. When they arrived at Kepler 442b, the Virex slaves couldn't believe their eyes. A Kethmori crystal ship was descending toward the mining facility, but something was wrong. It moved in strange patterns, and its usual blue glow flickered with chaotic rainbows. The ship's communication system crackled to life, but instead of the mental domination of Kethmori voices, the slaves heard something impossible, words of freedom in their own language. "This is Admiral Pierce of the Human Liberation Fleet," the voice said. "We're here to break your chains." What followed was the galaxy's first successful slave rebellion in 3,000 years. The Vrex workers, inspired by news of human resistance, turned their mining tools into weapons. The few Kethmori overseers, cut off from reinforcements and facing an entire world of angry former slaves, surrendered within hours. But the Vrex brought more than just their freedom to the human cause. Their silicon-based biology let them interface directly with crystal technology in ways humans couldn't. Their natural strength and endurance made them perfect for the hard work of building a resistance fleet. "We know every mining world in this sector," explained Vexthor, a Vrex leader whose crystal-scarred hands showed decades of forced labor. "We know where the Kethmori keep their shipyards, their supply stations, their backup forces." Soon, other liberated species joined the growing alliance. The aquatic Nethi contributed their knowledge of three-dimensional space combat. Fighting in the ocean had taught them to think in ways that confused enemies used to flat battlefields. The insectoid Skrit brought their incredible manufacturing abilities, able to build hundreds of ships where humans might build dozens. But it was humanity's gift for bringing different people together that truly changed everything. Where the Kethmori had ruled through fear and control, humans led through cooperation and respect. Captain Chen, now commanding her own liberated starship, worked alongside Vrex engineers and Nethi pilots as if they had been teammates for years. Mrs. Rodriguez set up schools on every liberated world, teaching both alien children and human kids how to learn from each other. The news of successful rebellions spread through the galaxy faster than Kethmori ships could respond. On 1,000 worlds, enslaved populations looked up at the stars and whispered a new word they had learned from humans: hope. Emperor Keth-Malar, ruler of the galaxy for 3,000 years, stood in his throne room on the crystal homeworld and faced reports that should have been impossible. 67 worlds had rebelled in the past month. His fleets were scattered, chasing human ships that appeared and disappeared like ghosts. Worst of all, his own people were beginning to ask questions they had never asked before. How can lesser beings defeat us? Young Kethmori warriors wondered. Are we truly superior if we can be resisted? For the first time in his ancient life, Emperor Keth-Malar felt something his species had forgotten how to experience: doubt. The humans had brought more than rebellion to his galaxy. They had brought the idea that things could change, and change, he was beginning to realize, was the most dangerous weapon of all. Emperor Keth-Malar stood before the ancient crystal that had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. The Omega crystal was older than his empire, older than his species, older than most of the stars in the sky. It hummed with power that could tear apart suns and reshape entire solar systems. "Show me the status of our worlds," he commanded. The crystal's surface filled with images that made his shell crack with stress. 137 worlds had joined the human rebellion. His fleets were scattered across the galaxy, fighting enemies who appeared from nowhere and vanished like smoke. Worst of all, some of his own Kethmori commanders were beginning to question their orders. "The humans must be stopped," he said to his council of ancient advisors. "They spread chaos like a disease. Soon our entire empire will collapse. Elder Morthane, oldest of the Kethmori after the Emperor himself, spoke in a voice like grinding stone. "There is one solution, my lord. The Omega Protocol." The other council members stepped back in fear. The Omega Protocol had not been used in 2,000 years, not since the last Great Rebellion. It was the ultimate weapon of the Kethmori Empire. Technology that could make stars explode, turning entire solar systems into burning graves. "You suggest we destroy our own worlds?" asked Elder Zithkara. "Better our worlds die than fall to chaos," Morthane replied. "The humans have shown that slavery can end. If this idea spreads, our empire becomes meaningless. We must choose. Rule over ashes or watch our order crumble." Emperor Kethmaler studied the images of rebellious worlds. On each one, former slaves worked alongside humans, building ships and weapons, sharing knowledge and hope. Children who had never known freedom played in the streets while their parents learned to make their own choices. It should have been beautiful. Instead, it terrified him. "Begin the Omega Protocol," he ordered. "Target the human homeworld first, then every system that has joined their rebellion. Let the galaxy see what happens to those who challenge order." Across the galaxy, massive Omega devices emerged from hidden storage facilities on Kethmori military worlds. Each device was the size of a city, built from crystal that could focus stellar energy into weapons of unimaginable power. When activated, they could reach across space and destabilize the nuclear fires that burned in the heart of stars. The first target was a small system called Ross 128, where humans had liberated a Vrex mining colony. The Omega beam reached across 40 light-years in seconds, penetrating the system's star and disrupting the delicate balance that kept it burning steadily. Within hours, the star began to swell and brighten. Within days, it would explode in a supernova that would sterilize every planet in the system. Captain Sarah Chen received the emergency transmission, while her ship was helping evacuate refugees from another liberated world. The message from Ross 128 was brief and terrifying. "Star-going supernova. All ships evacuate immediately. Tell Earth they can destroy suns." Sarah felt her heart turn to ice. Ross 128 had 3 billion people. Humans, Vrex, Nethi, and dozens of other species who had just learned what freedom meant. Even with every ship in the Liberation Fleet, they couldn't evacuate more than a few million. "All ships, this is Captain Chen," she broadcast on every frequency. "Emergency evacuation protocol. Every vessel, every shuttle, every escape pod. Get to Ross 128 now. We leave no one behind." The next few days became the greatest rescue operation in galactic history. Human ships, Vrex cargo haulers, Nethi deep space vessels, and even captured Kethmori transports raced to save as many lives as possible. They packed people into ships far beyond safe capacity. They used life support systems designed for hundreds to keep thousands alive. But it wasn't enough. When Ross 128's star exploded, 2 billion souls died in the nuclear fire. On Earth, President Maria Santos received the death count with tears in her eyes. Admiral Pierce stood beside her in the emergency command center, his face carved from stone. "They're willing to commit mass murder to stop us," Santos said. "How do we fight an enemy who would rather destroy everything than lose control?" "We don't give up," Pierce replied. "Those people died for freedom. We dishonor them if we surrender now." But the weight of responsibility was crushing. Reports came in of more Omega devices powering up throughout Kethmori space. The Emperor wasn't bluffing. He would destroy world after world until the rebellion ended. Dr. Elena Vasquez worked day and night in her laboratory, surrounded by the greatest minds from a dozen species. They had made incredible progress understanding Kethmori technology. But the Omega Protocol was beyond anything they had encountered. The devices used quantum entanglement to affect stellar cores across vast distances, she explained to a meeting of resistance leaders. To stop them, we would need to disrupt the quantum fields that connect them to their targets. "Can we build something that powerful?" asked Vexthor, the Vrex engineer who had become one of their most trusted allies. "Maybe," Elena said, "but we would need to get close to the source. The Kethmori homeworld has the master control system for all Omega devices. If we could reach it, that's suicide," Captain Chen said. "Kethmorak Prime is the most defended world in the galaxy. It's surrounded by 1,000 crystal ships and protected by weapons we can't even imagine." "It's not suicide if it works," Admiral Pierce said quietly. "And it's not suicide if the alternative is watching billions more people die." Elena's team had made one more discovery, a way to amplify the human chaos effect on a massive scale. If they could build a neural disruptor array large enough and get it close to the Kethmori homeworld, they might be able to sever the psychic connections that held their entire empire together. But it would require the sacrifice of everyone involved. The device would need to be powered by human minds working at maximum chaos, burning themselves out to generate enough neural interference. The crew that carried it to Kethmorak Prime would not return. President Santos addressed the combined fleets of the Liberation Alliance. Thousands of ships floating in space around Earth, carrying millions of beings from hundreds of worlds, all of them refugees from Kethmori oppression, all of them willing to fight for the freedom they had finally tasted. "They offer us a choice," she said, her words broadcast to every ship, every station, every rebel base in the galaxy. "Submit to slavery or watch our worlds burn." But they're wrong. There's a third choice. We can take the fight to them. She explained the plan. The desperate assault on the most protected world in the galaxy. The neural disruptor that would require human volunteers to sacrifice their minds to power it. The slim chance of success against impossible odds. "I won't order anyone to go," Santos concluded. "This has to be a choice freely made. But if we succeed, slavery ends forever. If we fail, at least we fail fighting for something that matters." The response surprised everyone. Ships from across the galaxy volunteered for the mission, not just humans, but Vrex, Nethi, Skrit, and dozens of other species, even some former Kethmori slaves who had learned to think for themselves. Admiral Pierce stood on the bridge of the flagship Defiant Hope, looking out at the greatest fleet in galactic history. 15,000 ships of every size and design, united by a simple idea, that freedom was worth any sacrifice. But as they prepared for the journey to Kethmorak Prime, more Omega beams lanced across the galaxy. Stars exploded, worlds died. Billions of beings who had dared to dream of freedom were burned away in nuclear fire. The Emperor had made his choice. Now humanity and their allies had to make theirs. The battle for Kethmorak Prime began before the Liberation Fleet even arrived in the system. Thousands of crystal ships waited in perfect formations around the homeworld, their hulls glowing with weapons that could tear apart planets. Emperor Kethmalar had called back every vessel from across his empire, creating the largest military force in galactic history. But Admiral Pierce had learned something important about fighting the Kethmori over the past months. They expected order. They planned for logical attacks. They could not adapt to chaos. "All ships, execute pattern Omega," Pierce commanded from the bridge of Defiant Hope. Instead of attacking in formation like a proper fleet, the Liberation ships scattered in every direction. Human vessels dove straight toward the planet's surface. Vrex cargo ships suddenly revealed hidden weapons and began attacking from impossible angles. Nethi submarines moved through space like they were underwater, confusing enemy targeting systems. The Kethmori commanders tried to respond, but every time they prepared for one type of attack, the rebels switched to something completely different. Their perfect formations began to break apart as they struggled to fight an enemy that refused to follow the rules of war. Captain Sarah Chen piloted her ship through a maze of crystal vessels, weaving between their weapons fire with moves that made no tactical sense. Behind her flew Mrs. Rodriguez in a school transport that had been converted into a fighter, teaching alien children how to operate human weapons while dodging enemy attacks. "Remember, class," Mrs. Rodriguez called out as her ship spun through a barrel roll. "Sometimes the best answer is the one nobody expects." The children cheered and pressed buttons that fired chaos broadcasters at nearby Kethmori ships, causing their systems to malfunction in spectacular light shows. In the center of the battle, Dr. Elena Vasquez worked frantically to complete the neural disruptor array. The device was enormous, a collection of human brain scanning equipment, alien crystals, and Marcus the janitor's homemade electronics all wired together in ways that hurt to look at. "How much longer?" Admiral Pierce asked, his ship shaking as enemy weapons hit their shields. 5 minutes if everything works perfectly," Elena replied. 20 minutes if we hit the usual problems." "We don't have 20 minutes, Pierce said, watching enemy ships closing in from all sides. That's when the unexpected happened. Across Kethmorak Prime's surface, slave populations that had been controlled for thousands of years began to wake up. The massive space battle was creating so much mental chaos that the Kethmori's psychic control network was starting to fail. On the crystal cities below, Vrex workers looked around in confusion as their minds became their own for the first time in centuries. Nethi technicians stopped their assigned tasks and began sabotaging the equipment they had been forced to maintain. Skrit laborers turned their tools into weapons and began attacking their Kethmori overseers. Emperor Kethmalar felt his empire crumbling beneath his feet. In his throne room deep inside the planet's core, alarms wailed as reports poured in of rebellions on every level of his world. "Activate all Omega devices at once," he commanded desperately. "Destroy every rebel world simultaneously. End this chaos forever." But even as his orders went out, the neural disruptor array finally powered up. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood beside her creation, tears streaming down her face. The device would work, but it needed human minds to power it, minds that would burn out from the effort. She had volunteered to be the first. "For everyone who died at Ross 128, she whispered, placing her hands on the neural interface. "For everyone who dreams of freedom." The disruptor activated with a sound like 1,000 thunderstorms. Elena's mind, amplified by the device, reached out across space with pure human chaos. Her thoughts touched the quantum networks that connected every Kethmori ship, every control system, every mind link in their empire. The effect was immediate and devastating. On ships throughout the system, Kethmori warriors suddenly found themselves cut off from their psychic networks. The mental discipline that had made them superior for thousands of years crumbled in seconds. But Elena's mind was burning out from the effort. Marcus the janitor stepped forward and grabbed another interface cable. "Room for one more," he said with a grin, adding his chaotic thoughts to the neural storm. Mrs. Rodriguez joined them, bringing the scattered creativity of a teacher's mind. Then Captain Chen, Admiral Pierce, and hundreds of other volunteers throughout the fleet. Each human mind that joined the array made it stronger, sending waves of pure chaos through the Kethmori control systems. The cascade effect spread at the speed of thought. On every Kethmori world across the galaxy, the psychic networks that had held their empire together for 3,000 years simply stopped working. Slaves by the billions suddenly found their minds free for the first time in their lives. Emperor Kethmalar felt the moment when his connection to his empire died. For millennia, he had been more than just a ruler. He had been the central mind that coordinated billions of thoughts across thousands of worlds. Now he was just one being, alone and confused in his crystal palace. The Omega devices, halfway through their charging sequence, lost coordination and began shutting down. Without the psychic network to guide them, they were just massive machines with no purpose. On Kethmarak Prime's surface, the liberated slaves had taken control of the planetary defense systems. The crystal weapons that had protected the homeworld for ages now turned on the remaining loyal Kethmori forces. Admiral Pierce's fleet landed on the planet amid celebrations that could be heard from orbit. Friedrich's workers danced with human marines. Nethi technicians showed Skrit engineers how to reprogram Kethmori technology. Children from a dozen species played together in crystal gardens that had once been forbidden to them. In his throne room, Emperor Kethmalar waited alone as human soldiers approached. He was still 12 feet tall, still covered in diamond-hard shell, still physically powerful enough to crush any individual human. But his empire was gone. His superiority was revealed as an illusion. President Santos entered the chamber, flanked by leaders from every liberated species. She looked up at the ancient ruler who had terrorized the galaxy for thousands of years and felt pity. "It's over," she said simply. "Your people are free to choose their own path now. So is everyone else." Kethmalar stared down at this small, soft-skinned creature who had destroyed everything he had built. "You have brought chaos to the galaxy, disorder, suffering." "We brought choice," Santos replied. "The suffering comes from trying to control others. The chaos comes from freedom. Both are better than slavery." Across the galaxy, the transformation was already beginning. Worlds that had been industrial slaves for millennia began choosing their own destinies. Some former Kethmori territories formed new governments. Others joined the growing galactic alliance that humanity had started. A few chose isolation to heal from centuries of oppression. The Kethmori themselves faced a choice they had never expected to make. Without their psychic dominance, they were just another species among many. Some tried to rebuild their empire through force but found no one willing to follow them. Others, like the younger generation who had never known true power, began learning to live as equals. Former Emperor Kethmalar, now just an old being in a comfortable prison, watched through crystal windows as his homeworld transformed. Humans and former slaves worked together to turn weapon factories into schools, military bases into hospitals, slave quarters into homes. He had spent 3,000 years believing that order required dominance, that peace required control. But the chaotic galaxy the humans had created seemed more alive, more creative, more hopeful than anything his empire had ever achieved. In the memorial garden built where his throne room had stood, a simple plaque bore words in 100 languages. The message was the same in all of them. They thought strength meant making others kneel. We learned that true strength means helping others stand. The age of alpha species was over. The age of cooperation had begun.